voices blending, melodies ascending, harmony in the air. Our songs are never ending. In the barbershop we create magic. Brad and John show, yeah, it's pure classic. No instruments needed, just our vocal range. Notes flying high, it's our musical exchange. Tracy's station may try, but they can't compete. Our barbershop style, it can't be beat. Oh, the harmony of voices, so sweet. In the barbershop of life, our tunes will repeat. No need for instruments, no need for a band. Just the Brad and John show, the finest in the land.
It is the Brad and John show. Today's date is Friday, March 28th. The last Friday of March 2025. John, are you sad to see March go?
March has been a challenging month, I think, but I think April's going to be pretty good.
That is John Combest. You spelled his last name Combest. What does John do? John puts together this incredible list every single day of his life for the past 23 years. Never has missed one single day. Right, John? Never one single day you've missed?
Yeah, I don't brag about it. You just put your head down and do the work and execute.
And much better than a government employee, but that's a whole other story. But he's not going to get laid off by Doge. We don't have to worry about that. Anyway, John puts together this incredible list, and what we do is, especially on Fridays, we bring in these guys.
Time for the John Combest Top 3.
It is the John Combest Top 3, and what John does, he takes all these stories that he's got, these links he's got on his website, johncombest.com, and he gives us the top 3. We bring in this guy right here.
I'm Casey Kasem.
And what do you do, sir?
Now on with the countdown.
And we start with...
In third place...
You may have noticed that the Missouri legislature seems to be getting along better this year than they did last year. There don't seem to be as many acrimonious fights in the Missouri Senate, and you may wonder why. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch is tackling that question. Young reporter Ezra Bitterman, with the most appropriate last name for any journalist, Bitterman, tackles that question today with a question of his own. How much longer will the Freedom Caucus play nice on tax credits? Now, in a subject that we discussed a lot last year, Brad, you and I talked a lot about how the Freedom Caucus, often led by Senator Bill Eigel, would crush proposals coming from what were considered to be pretty mainstream Republicans. I think it's important to read Ezra Bitterman's lead to this story, which is completely objective and non-biased. Members of the Freedom Caucus really don't like tax credits. The hard right group is often more associated with fighting to push the body as far as they can to end abortion, crush trans rights, and cut taxes. While these things are certainly the group's priorities, tax credit proposals seem to stick in their craw. And the crux of the story, to get to the heart of the matter, is that the Freedom Caucus has declined to filibuster specialized tax credits for what you would consider special groups, like child care providers, tax credits for agriculture. You haven't seen big, long filibusters like you saw last year. Now, the Brad Hildebrands of the world would say that's because Bill Eigel is gone.
That's exactly
what
I was going to say.
But somebody like Rick Bratton, who's a proud Freedom Caucus member from the western part of the state, he points out the fact that sometimes the Freedom Caucus gets a little bit of something in exchange for not filibustering. So, for example, the Freedom Caucus was able to get their way on a transgender measure. We ended the sunset of the transgender protections. In other words, what Bratton is getting at, and he said this in a Rumble interview, is that he cares a lot more about about protecting the transgender youth protections, keeping kids from getting those surgeries, than he does about, quote, a dumb agriculture tax credit. I can probably file a bill next year and try to remove those from law. So in other words, the bottom line, Brad, the Freedom Caucus is acting a little bit more pragmatically this year with the idea of, okay, we'll get the most important stuff done, like protecting kids from transgender surgeries and hormones. We'll get that done, and we'll give a little bit on some tax credits for now. Maybe we can come back next year and end those tax credits. So a little more pragmatism, wouldn't you say, Brad?
John, how did you know I was going to say Bill Eigel?
Well, because it's one of your many obsessions, Brad. If it's not Tracy Ellis or someone else successful, it's going to be a Bill Eigel.
Well, no, hold it. But I'm not saying anything about success. Let's just be honest. Bill Eigel is the guy who was always yelling and screaming and, and essentially throwing a monkey wrench in the works. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, he led a number of filibusters. And let's not forget, if you were, say, a Cindy O'Loughlin, the Senate leader, you would say that Bill Eigel was doing that. Maybe because he was running for governor. In fact, she would come out and say that. So with that element gone, you see the Freedom Caucus being a bit more cooperative this year. And, there's some speculation that they're just kind of laying low and picking their spots. Probably smart for them.
Hey, I'll be honest with you. I think the whole thing with the Freedom Caucus is ridiculous. I just do. I mean, I know you're not going to agree with that, John, but to me, it's like, okay, guys, we should be all on the same team. It would be like the quarterback of like it'd be like Patrick Mahomes saying, "Okay, I'm the quarterback, but you linemen, you not on my team because of the fact that I'm the guy that really makes all the scores. You guys don't do anything." And guess what? They're just going to say, "Okay, dude, watch this." And when the ball's snapped, guess who doesn't tackle anybody? And Mahomes gets sacked. Get what I'm saying? You got to play as a team.
Hey, I get exactly what you're saying, Brad. We had a conversation in 2024 about Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman. And, people a lot of times expected, a lot of people expected her when she got elected to the Senate to be an immediate Freedom Caucus member. And her whole thing was she would rather be sort of a free agent, work with the Freedom Caucus on some issues, but not sign on to their team, so to speak, and agree with everything they do.
I don't even know where to start from all of the things that have been said that are just wrong.
You think?
Perfect timing, Brad. You have impeccable timing.
Okay. Sounds like we're ready.
You know who has terrible timing? People in story number 2, though.
Up a notch to number 2.
It was going to be a beautiful event at St. Louis University. St. Louis University was finally set to apologize for their role in slavery. The Jesuits employed some people 150, 200 years ago to build some buildings. They employed some slaves to do some work for some of their leaders. And SLU was finally going to give that apology that we need. And remember in the story, I'm 1% Senegalese, so I will include we in that story. There was going to be a big event this week, but you might have seen a headline in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that the event was postponed. Confusion reigned supreme. And now the true story comes out. Thanks to St. Louis Public Radio, their race, identity, and culture content creator, Andrea Y. Henderson, brings us the story today. Here's the unbiased headline. Descendants of enslaved black people who helped build SLU pulled out of a formal apology. When you read the story brought to us by our friends from St. Louis Public Radio, you will see that SLU was set to give an apology. They had worked hand in hand with a group called Descendants of the St. Louis University Enslaved. But at the last minute, the descendants decided that they weren't happy because there was one element of the apology that was missing. Brad, what do you think is most important to the descendants that they weren't going to get from SLU?
Cashola?
Cash payments, Brad. What good is an apology if you don't put some resources behind it? Think of all the people in St. Louis today who had a relative, who had a relative, who had a relative, who had a relative, who had an Auntie Clarice, who had an Auntie Genevieve that knew a guy that mated with a guy that was once a slave. Why can't we get our reparations, Brad? The SLU apology only included words and some light action plans. And you know what? The descendant said, "Give me my money. And if you don't give me my money, we are not going to stand on the steps with you and accept an apology. An apology is no good unless there's cash with it. So I say, good for my people. What good is an apology if it doesn't include cash, Brad?
John, okay, question for you. You found out you're 1% Senegalese by what system? What did you use, 23andMe by any chance?
I did not, no, but thank you. And I won't say the name of what I used, but it wasn't 23andMe. Thank you.
Oh, you got to be glad
we can talk about that in a crazy weird story block.
That has turned into an interesting story. Okay, so why didn't they, but I mean, this essentially got blown up at the last minute, correct?
Yeah, and now in their defense, descendants of the St. Louis University enslaved, they claim that at the last minute, until the day of the ceremony, they didn't know that cash reparations weren't going to be included in the announcement. Now, I find it hard to believe that SLU would put all this time and years of these conversations and BS public meetings and whatever, simp stuff, that they would do all this and not make it clear from the beginning, hey, we're not giving all of you a check. We're not writing a big check to apologize for slavery. I find it hard to believe that SLU would mislead these people about cash reparations, but I don't know. I mean, who's to say, right? What I don't get about this whole thing, why is SLU apologizing for slavery?
Well, John, you're being a little bit hypocritical here because of the fact that you're doing one side of the equation for this story and the other side of the equation for another story we had recently.
Which was what?
Which was the KWMU sale of the station from University of Missouri. You're essentially saying that the SLU people should come out and put all their cards on the table and said, okay, here's exactly what we're going to do. But then on the other hand, you're saying it's okay that KWMU doesn't say, well...
You're right, Brad, and here's the big difference. Okay. SLU and the descendants of the enslaved worked together on this deal, and then we're about to announce it publicly. And it's a cute analogy you're trying to make there. And, Brad, we have achieved 5 days in a row. You have mentioned St. Louis Public Radio. I don't know how many weeks it's been, but I think several weeks in a row you've gone 5 days in a row mentioning St. Louis Public Radio. So congratulations on that. We should have a bell we should ring when somebody like beats cancer or something. So the difference is, according to the descendants, they had worked out a deal with SLU, and SLU, pardon the expression, reneged on it. And I guess SLU's position is, hey, we never said we were going to cut you guys a check.
Public radio, NPR, where the news is what we say is the news.
Okay.
Have you seen the video of Elaine Cha doing some belly dancing to that?
Okay. First off, John, you know, I called the KDHX thing right on the button where I said it's going to be sold to. I even said EMF, which is that who it happened to be. Okay.
Yeah, you said it wouldn't be K-Love because of non-competitive stuff, but you were in the ballpark.
I was wrong on that one. Okay. In a year from now, here's what's going to happen. John, you're not going to believe what I'm going to say because mark this down. You're very good at this. Mark down March 28th. Brad said this.
We won't still be on the air, but go ahead.
In a year from now, the volunteers who got thrown out at KDHX are going to sue for reparations because they were operating as slave labor to the board of KDHX, and they're going to come back and say, we didn't get paid for all the programming, all the jazz shows we did, and all the various specialty shows we did. We didn't get paid. We want reparations. And you know what's going to happen?
What's going to happen?
They're going to say, tough luck, you suckers. We sold the station to this big company that's $1 billion company, Educational Media Fund. We sold the tower, and we all bought new BMWs. That's why we were on the board. That's why we wanted to get rid of the station, because we made a nice profit, and you guys are just all heathen slaves, and we don't care what happens to you. You think
it was the top story when those KDHX employees came to speak at the Westplex Chamber of Commerce on March 28th, 2026. It was a big day. Speaking of things that'll never happen, Josh Hawley is in story number one. Let's get to that, Brad.
The number one.
MissouriNet. I should say it the way that they like to say it. The MissouriNet has a headline up today about our own senator, senior Senator Josh Hawley. He supports RFK Jr.'s plan to cut 10,000 health and senior services jobs. Excuse me. Yeah, health and senior services jobs. I want to make sure I got that agency correctly. Josh Hawley says, quote, they are eliminating sprawl in order to refocus on the core mission of the Department of Health and Human Services. I said that wrong earlier. I said senior services. My apologies. He says they're going to do more with less, and that's exactly the right attitude. I bring up Josh Hawley today. Excuse me, Brad. I'm sorry about that. I bring up Josh Hawley today, not just because of the RFK HHS dilemma in terms of cutting jobs, but because there's an underreported story that Josh Hawley, in fact, announced on Twitter. And only one news outlet covered this. And they only just cited the tweet. They didn't do an original news story about that. But Hawley said on Wednesday that he's delighted to announce that at Hawley's invitation, Robert Kennedy Jr. agrees to come to Missouri to see firsthand the sites where the government dumped nuclear waste in St. Louis and the lives that have been ruined because of it. It is time to compensate these good people now. Hashtag MAHA. Make America healthy again. RFK Jr. is going to be meeting with some of our favorite people from the Coldwater Creek, Weldon Spring uranium movement. Brad, isn't that exciting?
Well, I mean, if it gets stuff done, I mean, I think
if there's some action with it, right?
Right. If this is a step in the right direction, because of the fact that, let's be honest with you, what do we figure? It's coming up on what, 80 years or something like that?
You were just a teenager, Brad, when that was happening. You were tooling around in your Model T when that happened.
I was born in 35. Yes. No, I wasn't a teenager. I was like 8 or 9 years old. I mean, and you wonder why I turned out this way because of the fact that where did my mom and dad take me to play? We played on this ball field just to the north of Lambert Field. And they would drop me off there and say, hey, play in the dirt. And I go, okay, great. And then he'd come back and get me, and my dad, I don't know if you knew this or not, my dad, for some reason, he used to always have a Geiger counter with him. And I hear this, and he'd go, okay, he got enough. And then they drive me home. That's what happened, right?
And we knew that your mom was the wisest woman in the world, not just because she had a brush with greatness at Kirby Junior High and the students there, but she was the luckiest woman in the world because she never subjected herself to listening to you on the radio.
Never once did my mother ever hear me on the radio. I talked about that a couple weeks ago, and someone said to me, okay, you're kidding about that. I go, no, I'm not. My mother never listened to me on the radio. Not one single time in all the times. And, she was alive for what, 38 years of my career or something like that? Okay.
Yeah, the idea of a mother withholding her approval for something that's clearly important to her child is something that the next time we do a seance with your mom, we should really explore. Like, why would you withhold approval of something that's so important to your child?
Well, you know what? I have to tell you something. It's funny you should mention that. Seance. I did a Ouija board session a couple weeks ago, and I brought up my mother. And when the board went around, it said NORADIO. And I thought to myself, my mom's speaking to me. My mom's speaking to me. Okay, we have to take a break.